And so what I wanted to do is I thought I would just sort of start out with a short introduction of kind of the exhibition, the Towards Luminescence exhibition that we had planned for the FlexSpace, and just kind of give a little timeline of how we arrived at where we are today. And the exhibition has been really interesting because it has really, the timeline has really been marked by the need to adapt and pivot and adjust to the current climate and situation in which we find ourselves. And so initially we had planned a show with Stacia and Mayumi Lake for May and June of this year. And then when the shelter-in-place order came through, at Riverside Arts Center, we just put a pause on all of the exhibitions that were planned and decided that we would consider just moving them to next year, or maybe need to readjust based on people's schedules. But we decided that we would just move that to next year and just pause. And then as the pandemic went on, I started to think about the opportunity that we have at the Riverside Arts Center with these beautiful windows that the galleries have facing the street. And I started to think about whether there might be ways that we could continue to offer art experiences for people in the community. And so I was thinking about that, and I had this idea to create an exhibition that would kind of provide some healing, you know, to the isolation and the anxiety that a lot of people were feeling during the stay at home. And so I contacted Stacia and Mayumi, and I asked them if they'd be up for trying to do something on sort of a short term. And they were up for it. So we developed this exhibition that we called Towards Luminescence. And it was going to be, instead of two people in the space together, it would just be one person followed by another. So a two-part exhibition sequentially. And so the first installation was Mayumi Lake. And she did this really lovely light show kind of installation with Japanese Shinto gods. And she's going to have an artist talk on July 11th. So I'd want to invite you to join that. There's also a short video of her piece on the FlexSpace website and on YouTube. So feel free to take a look at that. But right around the time when we were looking to shift from Mayumi's to Stacia's installation was when George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis, and the community of the society just erupted in these protests and pain and grief. And so at that point, Stacia called me and said, you know, she wanted to kind of consider what she was doing in the space with that space that had been provided. So that is kind of how we got to where we are. And I'll let Stacia tell you about her point of thinking. And when she called me, it made perfect sense. It was that we had a beautiful piece planned to install, but it felt not like the right moment to share that particular piece. And so I think without any other delay, I'll just turn it over to Stacia. And I really want to, you know, we really want to have a conversation, so feel free to jump in at any point.
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, I think I just want to start and say that I don't feel entirely comfortable being the center of a conversation about Black Lives Matter. And I hope we can talk more about that, but I also didn't want to, I wanted to risk not being perfect in order to have a bigger conversation. So yeah, I reached out to Liz mostly because I was going to show a video work that you know, is important to me and was very relevant to COVID-19, but would have, I just didn't really want to be promoting myself or my work at that exact moment. So timing played a big factor. I wanted to listen, I wanted to learn, I felt like I shouldn't put something on social media about my artwork at a time where people were expressing grief and also sharing information about what protests to go to and like talking about actually the movement. And the work was something that would have not set, it would have been in the wrong context. It would have actually maybe done even harm, in the sense of it was about us being all together and how do we feel together, and that is a very empty sentiment when, you know, Black people are being killed. So we decided not to show it, and we had to do something quickly, or wanted to do something quickly. And I want to just say, like, I don't know if I did the right thing, and I also didn't do that much. So I want to think it's really important to not talk about a sign in a window as an artwork. That it, for me, that's not my work, right? But I had been given space. I had space that was allotted to me, and it seemed also wrong to just not do anything. Like, that was a kind of silence. So I kind of was in the middle, and still am, of like learning and listening more, and reading and thinking and talking a lot about racism and anti-racism and how to do that. And so I mostly just chose to do something simple, which was just to amplify the message of the Black Lives Matter movement without adding any commentary. So I guess Liz had a little bit of, you know, people being like, oh, why is it not an artwork? Or what does it mean? And, you know, I really just want to say, like, it's not an artwork. I'm a person who put a sign in a window, just like all the signs in the windows. And I have, you know, I don't want to take any authority for, like, I didn't make this movement. This movement has been going on for years. It's just getting traction in the wider, like, basically with more white people, honestly, are showing up. And I just wanted to use the window to keep that message in people's minds. So I think that's mostly all I want to say about my motivations, but I'd like to open it up and see if people have thoughts, or if you have questions. Again, I am not an expert in like, I can't facilitate any kind of anti-racist education. I am learning, but I think we're all people in this culture, and we probably have feelings and thoughts. So I wonder if y'all have any questions or just want to express anything. And I think you can feel free just to jump in, or if you have questions for me.
I have one. Has everyone seen the Flex window? I could share an image of that if you haven't seen that. Let me see.
I mean, it's not, I'm like, don't even share. I mean, you can share it, but it's just a sign, right? It's not even like, I did not want to aestheticize it. I didn't want to have it feel like a work of art in any way. But yeah, you can feel free to share it.
Yeah, I thought we'd just kind of, so you can see what we're talking about. And then, so this is, can you guys all see that?
Yeah, and just to say that the small text that you probably can't read does say, this is not an artwork. The artist, or the artwork that was planned to be here, is not relevant at this moment. And the person who hung the sign does so as a citizen, as opposed to an artist. And so I did want to make that distinction, because I think I've noticed and have been hearing, you know, I've been listening in my social media, and I think I wanted to avoid any kind of opportunism, right? Like, I wanted to just speak as a citizen and say that I support this, but not have it be benefiting me as an artist in any way. I think that would have been disingenuous. So, I mean, maybe I'll pose a question to y'all. And I guess the question is, like, what is the power of a sign? Like, does it have power, or how do y'all see that right now?
Well, I certainly believe that signs have power. Sure.
I think about, like, when I think about that question, it makes me think about how I feel when I go into a space that has signs that I don't like. For example, you know, pro-Trump signs make me uncomfortable. So I would say, thinking about that, I think they do have power.
I think there's a gesture. I think that's something in that, that's an interesting point, because as a sign is a gesture, it's a message, it's an intentional expression that's meant to be seen continually, right? It's not like, oh, I just said this thing and it can go into the air and then it disappears, but it's there. So there's a confrontational quality, maybe not confrontational isn't necessarily the right word, but there's a sense that there's a real intentionality to that communication in a way.
I think also there, like when you put up a sign, you have an intention to express how you feel about something. And I think like anytime you express an opinion on something, I mean, that has an effect. Now, how much of an effect, I don't know, but I think we can't deny that there's got to be power in saying, expressing what you feel about something and that you want to let people know that, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking out loud.
No, thanks, Erin. I think, and I guess the way that I'm thinking about it too is because I've also been listening and thinking a lot about like the emptiness of signs, right? Like there's a lot of conversation online, especially about virtue signaling right now. So like who's just putting up a Black Lives Matter sign, but isn't really looking at themselves or thinking about the ways that they're complicit. And I think that's an important criticism, but I do disagree with some criticisms that say like, well, like, or I can't disagree with people's feelings that they're angered by that, but I don't see all of that as having a negative impact. I guess I think when someone posts a sign or puts Black Lives Matter on their Instagram, you don't always know what else they may be doing, but it is also valid to say, are you doing anything else? And maybe that's not enough. And I think a lot of people were responding very strongly in a negative way to a lot of the announcements coming from cultural institutions saying we stand with you in solidarity. So there is this danger of, well, I don't know exactly what the danger is, because I still kind of think saying it's better than saying nothing. But I also think the sign isn't enough.
I think it's really interesting that, when you raise that point about, that some people were just putting Black Lives Matter on the windows boarding up their stores to keep people away, whether they were, part of the movement or not, or, really believed that even. And it's interesting because you don't know what people's motivations are for putting up a sign. And it can be an invitation to a conversation. It can be an invitation to challenge. And I think that, we're right now at this point, I think just reflecting and learning about the level of racism, the level of things that we haven't paid attention to, certainly as white people in our culture, and learning about the amount of things that really need to be addressed and really need to be questioned and challenged. And so it's sort of this, I find it a really interesting kind of process of just like self-reflection, and also I see a lot of people doing that, and a lot of people challenging things that have long been just assumed.
I was going to say something. Can you hear me? Hi,
Yes.
Jennifer. I was thinking that, we were talking about the power of signs, is that it's not just the sign itself, but your notation on the sign that gives it this other layer, that you're displacing yourself. You're not displacing somebody else. You're giving up your space. And I think that, to be confused in this moment, or not sure, as a white person, what to do, or how it's perceived, and your sincerity and everything, it's really confusing, and it's really difficult for everybody to try to navigate. But I appreciate the effort you made, and I appreciate the fact that you whether you want to call it as an artist or a citizen, that's up to you, but the fact that you displaced yourself in that moment, and it's not like you're taking away from somebody else. I think there were some a lot of talk about the Tuesday when people were blacking out their Instagram posts, and how that was became a little controversial in the sense that, you know, the good intentions were there, but then they were sort of blocking the feed of like other information. And I think the distinction here is that, you know, you're not doing that at all. So it's, you know, it's quite different, and you're not, the sign has that added layer because you're displacing only your own art at that point. So.
Yeah, thanks. I think I can see Judith wants to say something. I'm going to respond really quick and then say Judith. Yeah, I want to say thank you, but also, that's part of why I even feel uncomfortable now, is like I chose not to put my name on the sign because I didn't want to center myself, but now you guys all came to the talk and it had my name on it. But I guess I'm kind of just going to be okay with that because I had the opportunity and I wanted to use it. But I want to kind of name that there is art, like, it's like, ooh, she's so great. She gave up her artwork. Like I
totally get that.
Yeah,
I get
you know
that.
what I mean?
I appreciate that. But I mean, I think it's that having the conversation around it is, you know, the important thing. So.
Yeah. Judith, do you want to?
I really wanted to say similar of what Jennifer, hello Jennifer, it's been a long time, that I so appreciate what you've done here. That, I mean, it's, first of all, there's no neutral anymore. There, you know, anything you do is going to be complicated. So any act kind of seems bold to me, but to have removed yourself and your show, and I'm a big fan of your work, so I'm missing seeing your work. And so that gesture that you've done here, to me, becomes all the more powerful because you've taken you out of it. I actually really appreciate that you've had it come for you as citizen and not you as artist as well. And I personally see this as quite different than the social media one split second act. I think there's I understand the complications. I understand, I mean, one can be paralyzed now to do anything at all. So I deeply, deeply appreciate what you've done here to open up the conversation, to open up yourself, to, I mean, just not naming names, but having heard people really unhappy about having lost shows, and I get that, but you're not even going there. You're just giving away from the heart something that I'm sure matters to you deeply, and doing something very different.
Well, thank you. And I also want to name another feeling that I'm having, which is, I agree. I'm not like self-deprecating, but at the same time, there's also the motivation not to be seen as a jerk, right? Like there's as much a actual moral imperative to like give up my space, but it's not untouched by the fear of if I did something really insensitive and then everyone would talk about it, right? So, and I think that we're all like that, right? So I think I want to say that out loud because we all have instincts of self-preservation, even as we want to maybe challenge the system, right? And I think that self-preservation has maybe been like controlling me for too long. Like I wouldn't say I'm completely unvocal, but I would say that I'm maybe moving from the non-racist to anti-racist and just starting to understand what that means. That, you know, I would certainly try not to do racist things, but now I feel like I want to do more than just not do racist things. And also I have done racist things, whether I wanted to or not. And I'm getting more comfortable saying that. And so, yeah, I think, and Judith, I think you might have participated in the Academics for, so I don't know how many other people knew about or did the Academics for Black Lives training last week. I just want to sort of, and I'll put some resources in the links if you're interested, but that was pretty life-changing, and it was a week-long training created by Dr. Della Mosley and Paris Bellamy, who is a master's student in counseling psychology at I think it was the University of Florida. University of Florida. And they basically created a week-long training that focused on academics and like confronting and thinking about white supremacy in academia, but it was insanely comprehensive and had all these moving parts in terms of like you had an accountability group and you watched videos and then you read things, you listened to lectures and you did self-reflection. And it's really just been a week, but I think that played into like when I needed to do something or do nothing, I just sort of also wanted to put something up so that I could actually turn around and do more learning. Yeah, I think that part about really, now I feel like I'm rambling. I'm gonna stop because I'm just like about to go on and on and on. Does anyone else want to weigh in?
Well, this might be a good moment. Rich Lukes has raised his hand. So Rich, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, I just didn't want to interrupt anybody by just jumping in.
Thank you.
I think the key to this, it's not about the sign, it's what the impact is having on other people. The fact that we're having this conversation is one thing, but it's really about, is the message getting through? Like any piece of art is what the artist is trying to convey, getting through to the people, well, in your case, she is trying to convey it to. So if the message is getting through, that's great. If it's not, then there's your answer.
And it might be a question. I think that's really interesting. To me, that's a really interesting point. Is the that it's an attempt to communicate, and so is it enough? I guess it's one way of communicating, and so there's that message, and then there's other ways to put that message out. So I think that's kind of it's an interesting question, because it's like you don't know if. From a sign, you don't necessarily know if people are getting the message, but if you have a conversation, it's actually one of the reasons we wanted to have this conversation, because there were a few people asking, like, well, what does it mean to do this as a citizen and not an artist, and this is an art gallery, and so are we going to now do, is it open to just people making citizen comments, and so it's an interesting kind of dialogue, and what I feel is that we had arranged a space for Stacia to put up an artwork, and there was the one we had chosen wouldn't have been the right thing. And so then what to do in that? We could have just not done anything. And I was thinking this morning actually about what if we would have just left the space open? Like, what if we would have just said, there's nothing to say, by leaving it empty. But I don't think I think it's a better choice to say something. And so that's what, when we were having that conversation, I think that was kind of what was that the crux of it, as you remember, Stacia?
Yeah. And I think it's also important to say, like, it's funny because it doesn't even seem very like a controversial sign, right? But like several years ago, I would say, was it 2015 or 16, the summer that Philando Castile and Alton Sterling were killed, was, I would say, a summer when I started to pay more attention slowly to learning more and thinking more. But I was still a little bit like, am I gonna put that sign up? Like, am I ready to have a conversation with someone who doesn't, like, I did not agree with it, but I was like, I didn't feel prepared to even have a conversation if someone should challenge me on it. So I felt like, I'm gonna hold off. But now the signs are everywhere, right? And it's like, that could be a sign of people are just virtue signaling. That could be a sign that people are actually paying a lot more attention and getting behind the movement. In the long run, I don't think it really matters as long as it's like advertising. If you just see the message over and over again, whether you're consciously thinking about it every time you see it, it becomes like embedded in your brain, right? And I think what's interesting, I've been asking myself the question is, if you see Black Lives Matter over and over again in people's windows, on their cars, just as you walk through your neighborhoods, do you become, what's the word, where you're like, you get used to it and you stop thinking about it? Does it become background, or does it continue to challenge you? And I definitely think it's, in some ways, it's starting to become a little background, which is when I'm like, oh, is that when you change the message just to keep it, like maybe next time I would put a, you know, different message in that would update it, right? But I do think advertising clearly works on us, even when I'm trying to actively resist its message. So maybe the Black Lives Matter signs also work that way on people, if they're just in the windows and you're walking by and you're seeing it every day, or
I
so,
wanted
yeah, I
to-
don't know. Yeah,
I wanted to add something about sort of saying something or not. And I think with all of us that are involved in the art community, there's this kind of overwhelming anger, guilt, frustration at this sort of like larger institution that we're all a part of. Can we, as a collective, sort of make any kind of lasting change? But I think what it comes down to is all we have is our individual gestures. We cannot, as individual artists, we just simply don't have the power to sort of, you know, do one thing that's going to make a major change, even in our community, in our city, in our institution, in our country. And so I think what really, like, what's inspiring about your work, and I think what we can all sort of strive to do is, like, how do we in our own practices address this issue and really focus ourselves in on our individual behaviors, our individual expression, and really using our platform as artists to sort of examine, you know, as Stacia, as you've been saying, sort of like our own involvement and participation in this kind of institution, and sort of, you know, using that as a way to slowly chip away. I mean, I really responded to this piece because I have felt very paralyzed in my own sort of life and practice, and sort of just been thinking like, this is too big, you know? But I think the power of something like what you did, you know, it really kind of reminded me, like, you know, we do have what's available to us, and, you know, sort of like, how can you be creative with, you know, I mean, we're all sort of like stuck in our creepy little apartments right now trying to figure out how to make work. And, you know, it's sort of, I'm really trying to sort of shift my perspective from like just feeling really overwhelmed and frozen to like, okay, here's what I have, here's what I can do. Let me see if I can do something here.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to say, well, two things. One, and not to be a stickler, I really don't want to call what I did a piece. It's like, again, just to reiterate that, it's
Sorry.
just not, no, it's totally okay. And I think that's what's sort of awkward about the sign itself, right? And where it is in the context of an art gallery, is that it's actually kind of hard not to call it a piece or say that like, I did this big thing, but actually like everyone who's hanging a sign is doing the same thing, right? So, and in terms of the question of what to do in our practices, I actually am like, I don't know if I do want to change my art practice, but that doesn't mean that I can't work towards anti-racism in different ways. And I think that's what what that Academics for Black Lives training sort of helped me see, was that actually, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Art has a tendency to bring out emotion, whether it's in a P2 show or music you play or listen to. So it has an immense impact on people. The fact that we're even here having this conversation implies the impact of what you just did. So you may, I don't know the other person's name, but if you may feel paralyzed, but, you know, simply speaking out, getting your opinion out there to the, you know, to others, your friends, social media or whether, has a huge impact. In fact, like I said, the fact that we're having this conversation is a big deal. It's now a matter of what we do about it.
And I guess maybe I would then say, lots of things have impact and they aren't art, right? So I'm not disagreeing with you, but I think like not every action that we take just because we are artists must be art.
Oh, I'm not implying that at all.
Okay.
But in this case, I mean, yeah, you did it in an art gallery and it's basically just a sign. You know, the fact that we're having the conversation is a big deal. Whether you want to associate it with the art or not, you know, that's one thing.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. You know, I think it's an important thing, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's what Stacia and I, you know, and because initially we weren't going to have I think I said that we weren't going to have a conversation, and I said, you know, I think it would be good to do that. It's like, why not? And it's an opportunity to have a conversation about these issues, which are really important and really matter, and it's something we can do, and it's something we need to do, and, you know, expand who we do that with. And so I think that it's, yeah, I think that's a good point.
Also, a number of us here are educators, and you know, if we think about it, we've been working on our own practices for years and years and years, you know, decades, and we've had a lot of time to think about how things evolve, one following the next. And I mean, maybe if you were doing this a year from now, 2 years, you'd do something different. I don't even think that really matters, Stacia. It's the fact that you thought about it and decided to respond. And in that sense, this feels more determined and outspoken than, and not just literally, than leaving the gallery empty without it, which might have felt to me at this time like the easier way out. I can't say, I mean, having just also listened to this week of My Brain is Full, I don't think I can even process what I've heard yet. Yeah. And I really admire your deciding, I'm going to put myself out there in some way, and this is my opening gesture as a person, as an artist, as an whatever.
Thank you. Yeah, I think maybe my my continued assertion that it's not an artwork, maybe the reason for that, if I really think about it, is that if it could do anything, I would like it to actually just inspire other people to say something, so that you don't have to be if it's not an artwork, you don't have to be an artist to make a statement, which it's like activists have been doing this forever, right? The movement was started by, you know, 3 Black women, and actually Alicia, Garza, Patrisse, Cullors, and I can't remember the other woman's name, which I feel bad. Does anyone remember the third woman's name? Okay, so we should look that up, because the point is they started this movement and they started that hashtag, and I just participated, right? And so I think that's a little bit the distinction I make, is that as an artist, like, even though I don't really believe in our uniqueness of art, I actually believe more interested in the way that we keep repeating the same stuff. Like, I would take ownership of my action in a different way. But it's important to say that I'm actually just following people who started the movement, you know, and that everyone can do that. And maybe as artists, we do it differently. So I don't know what I'll do in the future, but generally my work has never been political. I always talk about it in relation to the spiritual or the psychological. But obviously those are connected to our world. So we'll see.
So maybe this is a good moment to ask Jenny Halpern has a question for you. And she sent it through the chat. So she said, I have a question. I also appreciate the giving up of space. My question is, what might be a next step from there to help change become more of an action?
So I guess for me as an individual, for all of us, or for like an art gallery?
I guess maybe from an individual perspective, and then maybe specifically of giving up a space that happens to be an art space. Like, is there like a next step from that, rather than like just giving up the space?
I mean, I would say that the next step for me as an individual, and that's actually been going on for, you know, weeks and weeks, is to spend a lot more time like listening and trying to understand what's being said, and to pay attention to my own inner resistance as a white person. I think, you know, like what this training did for me, I think, is that I'm just going to say I'm a racist, or not, I'm not a racist, I'm racist, because we all are. And that got recorded, and now I'm like, oh my God, someone could take that out of context. But I think the point is, I'm racist, but I don't want to be. So like now I got to spend some time looking inward. And it's not like I've never done that at all, but I have not done that in any directed, clear way. So I think one thing I learned through the training, which was predominantly led by Black women, and what's great about that is it's like I'm learning that I don't have to do the things I thought I did. Like, it's actually like we feel this sort of, I feel, I should just speak for myself, but I know people, I've talked to people who share this, like this urgency to do and say something immediately. And actually, if you're not sure what to do or say, then I would say, like, look into some of these resources where you actually go inside and say, like, wow, how have I internalized a system of white supremacy? And where's my resistance to, because I have had resistances for sure. I felt like I don't even think I totally understand what's being said when people are critiquing whiteness in the past. And I think the training really helped me understand that a critique of whiteness is not about critiquing individual white people. Like, it's not about saying that white people are bad, but it is about saying, like, we're all intimately connected to this system, you know, and sort of looking at how that is. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, Jenny, because I think it's summer. I'm a teacher. I do have the privilege of having some time to work in my studio now. So I'm gonna just keep listening to podcasts about racism while I make my own work, which is not directly about racism. And then I'll kind of see what happens. Another next step, actually, I will mention, which I maybe encourage lots of people to do. So that's my cousin Erin down there. Wave, Erin. So she lives in New Mexico, and we have already discussed that we would like to start, and we're going to talk about it this week, basically like a white racial identity consciousness raising group, where there's like, we get together with some, I think, white women that we know, so not strangers even, and we make a space to talk about like everything with no shame. So like that we can even talk about the shame we feel, or the guilt, or the resentment, or, you know, I think one thing about the training that I really realized was, like, I'm so resentful that I just didn't get educated right in the first place. Like, I'm actually really mad that I'm from the South. So like, just everything is always about glorifying, you know, the Southern leaders of the Civil War. And I'm really mad that I didn't get a better education to start with. So I think, like, maybe creating a space where you can talk to other people, other non-Black people, about all the things that you're feeling. I think, and I feel like now I'm going on to a monologue, so I'm going to say one more thing, which is the training, which helped me, it's not over, but what helped me kind of go a little deeper, I actually feel less guilty than I did before, but I feel way more responsible. And that is actually also kind of liberating for all people, right? That if I don't have to spend time pushing away the guilt for a system I didn't create, then maybe I actually have energy to do something about the system that still exists. So I don't know what that do is going to be yet.
I love that. Can I say something? So I, as an artist, and I think all of us are artists, I think it's appropriate that you, what I would term, took a pause, because as I'm also on the exhibition committee for the Riverside Arts Center, I was hesitant to have a show be promoted through the Riverside Arts Center during a very questionable time, when I felt it was more appropriate that the Art Center take a pause and let the news of the times be the central focus of everybody. And so I appreciate what you did. And I'll admit that at first, when I saw the image of the sign,
I thought, oh no, I hope that's not her artwork. So I appreciate the fact that you put that as a citizen, you did that and not as an artist. Because I think that it's appropriate for no matter what role you have in life, that you step aside from your role and let bigger things take the center stage. And I think that during the time of your show, it was that time.
Right.
So I think you did a good job.
You know, and I have to admit too, like, what would it be like if it had been like a really huge solo show that I've been preparing for years? Would I have been able to make that same move? I mean, it was a window space, and it was something we pulled together pretty quickly. The planning wasn't years in the making. So I don't really know the answer to that. Like, what do I think other artists should do who are having exhibitions? I don't think all artists should just change what they make, you know, but I think that's when we don't have to only be our role as artists, right? So I guess I don't really know what I would do if I had, you know, a museum show during that was supposed to open at that moment, right? Like, would I have been able to sacrifice in the same way? Like, so I think asking myself those questions, and as artists everybody asking themselves, like, it was actually, I guess it was a very small thing to give up, to be honest, because honestly, like, Liz and I had great conversations, and I'm still going to have a show next year. Right. So like, I didn't really lose much actually. So maybe that's a good way to think about, like, maybe we can give things up and actually they'll come back to us. Like, maybe we don't have to be so afraid of losing things in order to make some movements in the world. I don't know. I think fear of losing things is what actually stops a lot of non-Black people from, like, going deeper into this. But that is sort of like the essence, right, of white supremacy, that you want to uphold the system that serves you, even if you don't consciously want to do that, right? Like, I've never consciously wanted to uphold that system, but yeah. And there's something maybe to add to that. There's something about the competition in the art world, especially when you're like at the level that I am. It's like, I'm not like famous. I'm not like a blue chip artist. You know, we always feel at this level, I think a lot of us, like, that we're still scrambling just to get seen. Right. So what does it mean? Maybe that's like, maybe we're wasting our time with all of that. I don't know. I'm really questioning what is going to happen next and what I'm going to do as a teacher and what I'm going to do as an artist. I don't honestly know.
And I think it's sort of, you know, Joanne, when you mentioned that about the, you know, Stacia and I had conversations about, we didn't announce this as a show. Like, there just wasn't any, like, normally I would have said, okay, come by the FlexSpace and see this new thing. And, you know, I would have sent out notices, and we didn't do that. And I said, well, I have to take the thing down that we were going to do off of the website. And so what should we put there in place of it? And so we decided to put just the sign. And so it was this, but it was really, I mean, we had this sort of like, what should we do kind of conversation in terms of like how to do that, how to honor the decision that Stacia was making, while also somehow dealing with the fact that we had this website with something on it. And so we could have just not put anything, or, you know, and so it was an interesting, you know, it's an interesting question. And so we had this, it was quite a bit to decide what to do, which is, you know, it seems small, but it's really important. You know, these are important gestures.
I mean, yeah. And as you're saying that, I'm also thinking, whoa, we've actually not talked about the Black Lives Matter movement at all yet, right? Like, I put a sign up, and then like the reason for putting the sign up has been the whole conversation. That's not a judgment on anyone or us. It's just to notice that, you know, it's like, is this conversation even displacing a conversation around police violence, or whether we support defunding the police, or like, so I think now it's getting a lot easier for everyone to say Black Lives Matter, but then, okay, what, are you ready to say defund the police? Do you know all the information about that? I still don't know all the information about that, but definitely getting a lot closer to saying yes to that than I was a month ago. I think I've had these conversations before and I was like, oh, I'm not for that, because I didn't really understand what it meant, you know, but I think there's a lot more conversations to have around the actual issues of, you know, what's getting funded, who's getting funded. What does it mean that CPS, I don't know if you guys all know this, they just voted to keep the contract where they keep police in the schools. There was a school board hearing on Thursday. It was close, it was 4-3, but that should have been an ideal place to start the defunding and allow that money to just stay in the schools, right? Yeah, so I think it is important for us to think about what we do in the art world, but I think, you know, we also have to say, like, I do think art is very powerful and can do a lot, but there's some things I think that art can't do, you know, and it doesn't mean that we stop being artists, but maybe, like, my art isn't calling the school board or emailing them and asking them to vote no, right? That's not my art, but like that was an action.
So I just want to be conscious of time. We're 5 minutes to 3. And maybe that's a good moment to segue. And actually, before I move on, though, I do want to say that one of the things that I've really appreciated is the conversations that Stacia and I have had about this exhibition. It has been, we've had some really deep conversations, and I really appreciate, and I just kind of want to mark that that I have appreciated that, and also just really to thank you for the deep thinking that you're doing on these issues, and your humility, you know, your ability to really say, I don't know everything, this is just what I'm thinking about, and to really, I think it's very important to be in that kind of space, with an issue like what we have now. And so I think that I just really want to, you know, thank you for that and appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. And I also want to extend thanks to you, Liz, because I do think, you know, I could have reached out and say, I don't want to do this show because I don't think this is relevant. And another gallerist or gallery director might have said, well, you agreed to it and we're doing this thing. Or they might have just like not really cared as much. So I appreciated also that you had the time and the willingness to like continue to talk about it, because I think that's the kind of thing that will influence your future programming, right? Like having all these conversations. So I think, and maybe this goes back to Jenny's question about what do you do next? I think don't let all this recede into our regular lives. Like, because if I think most of us here, although I can't see everyone, so I don't really know, most of us have some privileges to turn away, right? Like from this stuff. Hey, Jenny. But I think, yeah, just keep having conversations. So don't let, you know, the death of George Floyd recede into, oh, now I'm going to go back. I mean, do your stuff, right? I'm going to keep making my work. I'm going to do some puzzles. I'm going to watch some TV. You know, I'm going to do the things I do in my life, but I'm also going to try not to forget. Like, I'm going to keep actively listening and learning.
So, and one of the things, what's that?
Just thank you all for coming.
Yeah.
I like the small, intimate group, but thank you for showing up.
And I think we talked about, I think mostly, you know, ahead of time, we kind of had some topics we wanted to make sure we didn't forget to cover. And I think we've talked about those. And one thing would be the resources, like what are, oh, there they are. So in the chat.
Just put some stuff in the chat. Everyone, if you wanted to, you could copy and paste it. And these are just things that mostly I learned this week through this Academics for Black Lives training. But there were some things that I found particularly helpful in understanding even just the conversation around like what is whiteness in the academy. There are some great YouTube links to some documentaries that I found really informative. Some podcasts I've been listening to, and then some people to follow on Instagram. So it's like, one thing I also realized is I need to not have as many people in my feed who are just saying like, you know, do better, do better, do better, or, you know, artists, what's wrong with us, or like stop virtue signaling. I actually just want to follow more anti-racist educators, because I do think, you know, in our art world, we all like to be loud, and it's not, again, I support posting what you think, but having these people in my feed has also changed my perspective in terms of just listening to them. So hopefully they'll be useful to you all as well.
Yeah, that's great. Can you guys all see the chat?
Oh, maybe.
I think I opened it up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I only went to Liz, and that was an accident.
Oh, okay.
Let me redo it.
Or maybe I can just repost it.
It was an accident. Let's see. All right, here we go. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
One thing that I found particularly useful is this this model by Janet E. Helms for understanding white racial identity development. It was totally illuminating, because I was like, oh, I've been in most of those places at some point. And I think it really helps undo the idea that we either are good people or we're not good people. We either are not racist or we are, right? Like, the model helps me understand, oh, there's different levels of understanding, you know? So I think I never really thought about that before.
Now, this is great. These are mostly new. These are all new to me. So that's really helpful. And I think there are a lot, I mean, on Instagram, there are a lot of, in terms of local Chicago area organizations to participate with. There's a lot of food drives going on and things like that. You know, and I think that you know, for me, I kind of question about education and then action. And, you know, sometimes I feel like, you know, donating money is really important, but it feels so small sometimes, you know, and so it's like, and I think like going and doing something is also really important, you know, and so there's these levels of engagement, I think that are really key. So.
Yeah, and I mean, I think in the past, sometimes like the idea that I had to do something in my mind was like, well, I have to go to a protest, you know, and if I don't do that, then I'm not really doing anything. And I would just argue that introspection is doing something. And if you do it, if you really look and say, where does this live in me? Where do I encounter it? What am I ashamed of? Even what am I proud of? Like, when did I stop myself or something, you know, like that will later lead to action. So it's like, you don't even have to jump, right, to be like, I should be doing this, I should be doing this. It's just like, look inside, see how you relate. If there's anything that you like, now I feel like I'm gonna stop. Now I feel like I'm preaching, like I know everything. I just became conscious. I'm like telling y'all all the best things. I'm gonna stop. That's my teacher. That's probably a little bit of my teacher. Just like keep going.
So are there any other last comments or questions or anything? That anyone, any resources anyone would like to share, that would be lovely.
Well, thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. Keep thinking and talking about these things.
Yeah, and keep the dialogue going. We're certainly excited to do that. And so this chat will be, or this conversation will be posted on our YouTube channel and on our website later. So if you know people who you'd like to share it with, please do. And then just a reminder, we'll have a meeting with a similar conversation with Mayumi Lake, whose work was in the window before Stacia's, and so that will be on July 11th at the same time, 2 to 3. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.